I think the first thing he needs to do is to continue to guarantee Israel's security in very tangible ways. Israelis are very worried, understandably, about rocket fire from both the north and the south, Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south. And I think the Obama administration has done a good job of helping Israel to build the anti-rocket and anti-missile defense systems like Iron Dome and Arrow that can help, and that could also help potentially against if, God forbid, there were to be threat attacks, missile attacks from Iran as well. So I think Obama needs to do that to reassure Israelis that Americans do take Israeli security seriously. But then I think he also needs to say very clearly that America believes not only that it's in Israel's interest to have a Palestinian state near the 67 lines, because otherwise Israeli democracy will not be able to sustain itself, but also that it's an American interest, because although Israel itself is a strategic asset, I believe, to the United States, and we do a lot of valuable military and intelligence cooperation with them, Israel's occupation is a strategic detriment to the United States. It doesn't serve Israel's security, and it fuels enormous amount of animosity around the Middle East. I'm not saying that people in the Middle East would love Israel even if it didn't occupy the West Bank, but the West Bank's occupation, where Palestinians have no citizenship, don't live under due process, they don't have free movement, they don't have the right to vote, is in some ways the most bitter pill for people in the Middle East to swallow, the thing that I think produces the greatest degree of hostility towards Israel and towards the United States, because we are so closely allied with Israel. And that's very important, especially today, at a time when the Middle East is in flux and governments are becoming more responsive to popular will. So I think what Obama should do is go back to what he said in May 2011, when he said there should be negotiations based on the 1967 lines with agreed land swaps. And Netanyahu rejected that, and Obama packed it in during the election. I think Obama should go back and say, I still, in some very high-profile way, I still believe this. The ball is in your court. Mahmoud Abbas basically said he accepted those kind of negotiations. Now, the Palestinians have a huge problem with Hamas. I don't want to minimize the issues that are involved in them being able to close a deal, but I think the strategy was always to strengthen Abbas through a peace deal and then put pressure on Hamas. And I think you can only do that if Israel's also willing to negotiate along those terms. And I think that what you can do, you can say to the Israeli people, in as many words, is that do they really want to be stuck with a prime minister who is outside of that kind of consensus established by Bill Clinton and Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak and now Barack Obama, even though it may imperil the relationship with the United States. Israelis don't like Barack Obama very much, but I think they are cognizant of not wanting to undermine Israel's relationship with the United States, which is very important strategically for Israel. And I think in the context of Israeli elections next year, and potentially the return of Ehud Olmert as a candidate who really is in support of the two-state solution, I think Obama laying down that gauntlet could have political implications in Israel that could lead to either a new government or this government shifting its perspective in such a way that it was willing to negotiate within those parameters in a way in which it hasn't so far. It's hard to know. I think one very clear sign would be that the leaderships in both on both sides had given up even rhetorically. So, for instance, at least right now, you have an Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who says he supports the two-state solution. I don't think he supports the kind of two-state solution that is actually realistic, given one near the 1967 lines. I don't think his vision of a two-state solution is one that any Palestinian could ever be accepted to accept, probably. But still, he talks about the two-state solution. The Palestinian leadership in the West Bank also talks about the two-state solution. On the ground, it's certainly true that the two-state solution becomes harder and harder to bring about as Israel continues to build settlements like, for instance, Ariel, the fourth largest settlement in the West Bank, which cuts 13 miles into the West Bank and creates really serious contiguity problems for a future Palestinian state. But it's worth remembering that, that large population movements have taken place throughout history when states have had the will to want to bring them about. And I think at the end of the day, despite the increase in radicalization of the Israeli settler population, if you had an Israeli government that was absolutely determined and courageous, with the backing of the world, determined to basically allow the creation of the Palestinian state on 95+% of the West Bank, that most of those settlers at the end of the day would leave if they confronted an Israeli state that simply demanded it so. I should say parenthetically that I do think that Jews should have the right to live in the West Bank under a Palestinian state, but I think realistically it's actually the Israeli government at the end of the day which will probably not want Jews to live under Palestinian sovereignty in the West Bank, because the Israeli government will know that they will be ultimately responsible for those citizens, for those people, whether they have Israeli citizenship or not. So I think as long as you have significant percentages of the publics in both countries and leaderships that at least rhetorically, and I think perhaps in this case of Mahmoud Abbas more than just rhetorically, really genuinely do support a two-state solution, it would be wrong to give up on it, given that the alternative, which is a one-state solution, I think would in reality simply be civil war. And so therefore it would be worse and more unworkable